All right, so we are ready to move on to the next part of this project where I am progressively building the competition piece for Kaiju 8, Mina Ashiro and her power suit. So the next part of this is going to be building all of the leather pieces that go on this suit. We have armor parts, we have pouches, we have a gun holster, um, and bits and bobs across the suit. I wanted them to all match. In the images, all of them have the same color, so anything that is the specific green is going to be leather. So this is something I'm a little bit more familiar with. I have done leather things in the past, and so building this was a lot of fun, and I'm a little bit more comfortable working on that. There is a process to leather, and this time I am experimenting a little bit more with wet forming, which is a technique that I have only used a couple of times in the past, mostly because I didn't really need it for any projects, but I felt like it really worked for this particular project. I also experimented with spray dyeing my leather using my airbrush. I have not done that before. I've only seen it in videos, and so I needed to experiment with that and test it out and see how I liked it because I did not want to have any streaking or any possibility of unevenness in tone when it came to the finished product. So, without further ado, let's go into the process of what I did for this leather part of my project. So the first thing that I needed to do was create a pattern for these pieces that are going to be going onto the suit. Using my own body as well as a dress form that I have that is custom made to my size, I began to measure my body in order to see how large these pieces needed to be. Then I could do the math necessary in order to kind of sketch out what I was going to need shape-wise. So I kind of wrote down the idea of what the general shape was going to be, and then I started to do the math of what it was going to need to be shape-wise and measurement-wise, so that I could then draw it out on some paper and then do kind of like a mock-up the way that I would do my sewing projects. I don't want to cut into this leather until I am certain that I am pleased with the size and the shape of it once it's all done. So making a mock-up of the final product out of paper really does help me to visualize how it's all going to work out. So once I've got all my math figured out, I can then draw it out onto this paper. I have a lot of art paper kind of just chilling out in my closet from other projects. I used to do a lot of sketching and painting and things, and so I have a lot of leftover supplies from that I've been kind of cycling through as I work through some of these larger cosplay projects. Eventually I'm going to run out, and I will then probably just use wrapping paper, but right now I'm still using some sketch paper in order to be able to create these pattern pieces. It actually works really well for me because the paper is stiffer, has a little bit more body to it, so when I go to make a mock-up of these leather pieces, I can fold it and manipulate it a lot similarly to the way that I would be manipulating my leather, because it can stand up on its own the same way that the leather would. So it does work for me better than using a wrapping paper in order to be able to mock up these designs. So what we're working on here is creating the body of the pouches, as well as the sides and belt loops and little pull tab that is on the front right underneath the snap. Once I have these pieces kind of all figured out, and here I am just measuring my belt to make sure that my belt loops are large enough in order to go over the belt. But once I have everything kind of like estimated out on the paper, then I can cut it out and fold it up and make kind of like a paper mock-up of this. Once I have all that done, I mark out where I'm going to be folding the pouch parts so that I can fold the bottom, the top, the flap, and then that way I know how big all of that's going to be for when I kind of start to do the mock-up. So you can see here, this is going to be the bottom of the pouch, and then here I am folding the top flap, and I kind of have just a little bit of a mock-up of what I plan on doing with this pouch. This is where I used my bra in order to create a breastplate kind of leather shape to go on the front of the suit. I've never really made these kind of shapes before, and I wanted something that was going to be, well, custom to my personal size. So I traced the shape of my bra and used these French curves in order to kind of like smooth that shape out. And then that is just going to be added straight onto the front of this suit, right like that, and then stitched on later. I went back to my roots for the knee and elbow armors. So I taped up my knee and my elbow, and then I drew on the shape that I was going to need in order to create these armor pieces. And then just simply mirrored that up and made those into pattern pieces as well. But this is the kind of general shape that I'm going to need to go on the front of my suit. Then I took those tape pieces and transferred them onto paper so that I had a smoother pattern to kind of copy onto my leather, using again my French curves to kind of like smooth out all of these lines so that they're nice and even. And I have something that is mirrored on both sides, so I don't get like a wonky shape. I will cut the one side, fold it over, and just copy it onto the other side. Then it is leather cutting time. Now leather, you cannot pin your pattern down. I know that this is the way I generally function when it comes to fabric. I do like pinning my patterns down on fabric. I'm not a pattern weight user, but I can't do that on leather because that will punch holes and bend up my pins. So I do have to take a scratch awl or kind of like a sharp object in order to kind of score the leather around the pattern, and then I follow it with my box cutter or my X-Acto knife in order to cut out the pieces. Now that I have all of my pieces cut out, I can begin wet forming. Wet forming is an interesting thing where you immerse the leather in water, which is not something that people generally think of. You immerse the leather in water until, from what I've learned, until it stops bubbling and releasing air. At that point, you're going to take the leather out of the water and let it kind of rest on your work surface until it's not shiny and wet on the outside. This means that the water has penetrated into the center of the leather pieces and has actually made the leather a lot softer in order to work with. So you leave it there for a little bit, and then you can come back and kind of mold the pieces of leather over the top of some sort of form. So today I am going to use a couple of different ways of molding. Sometimes you can use clamps and like a hard mold, and other times you can use just like a pressing method. So I made up this like little wooden piece here to kind of clamp the leather onto in order to create a holster kind of shape for my suit. So I've clamped these pieces of leather around this wooden shape to get kind of that holster shape. Um, Clamps and hard molds actually create sharper corners on your wet form molds. So that is why I went with this. I kind of wanted something that had a little bit sharper of a form to it when I was putting it all together. And then once it dries, it's going to hold this shape, right? I kind of work the leather into these corners and spaces so that then it can take on the shape of the holster that I am looking to create. Next is kind of like a softer form of wet forming. I need to create shapes to go on my knees, elbows, and across the chest, the breastplate pieces. So I have found some round objects in my house that are approximately the size of the different parts that I need to make. This one is a knee piece, and it is just a plastic bowl I had in the kitchen. So I am kind of pressing the leather a lot the way that you would press fondant over the top of a cake. So I'm pressing this leather over the top of that and getting kind of a curved shape to it. It's not going to be perfect because I don't have a clamp or a mold in order to kind of press it into and create a more dramatic shape. So it's going to have a more subtle roundness to it than the sharp curves and corners that I made on the holster. So I do this with a bowl for the knees, and then I move on to the elbows. And these are the little elbow pieces, and I found some round kind of cup lids to form those over. And then for the breastplate pieces, we had to get creative. I needed something that was different, like oblong shaped than the bowls that I was using. So we found a foam egg and we've just cut it in half and used that to shape the breastplate pieces over the top of. And so it creates kind of a subtle curve. If you want something more dramatically curved, you will start getting wrinkles as the curves are more dramatic. The leather doesn't stretch like a drastic amount. So if you are worried about getting like wrinkles and things in it, maybe try to avoid the more drastic molding. But since I'm not really trying to go for anything true dramatic, this is going to work out for what I'm doing. So the next thing that I want to do is dyeing my leather. If I dye my leather after it has been assembled, it's more likely that I'm not going to be able to get even coating of color on it. So the color needs to be put on before I assemble it, before I put on any kind of hardware, because I don't want the dye to get on the hardware. This is a new process for me. I've only just learned about pouring my dye into my airbrush. So I did do a test on this before I started and was very pleased with it. This is also the first time I'm using this particular kind of dye, and I do want to recommend that even if, because this bottle of dye does say that it is natural, even if things are natural, we still should be wearing PPE. Get yourself a ventilator or some kind of gas mask, whatever you need to do in order to stay safe. Even natural things, if in the lungs, can still be dangerous. So here we are dyeing all of the pieces of leather so that they are uniformly green to match the rest of this. And I am pleasantly surprised. I do quite a bit of leather work, even outside of my cosplay stuff, so it is something that I'm excited to continue to be able to do in the future. It looked really nice. It was very smooth and uniform in color when it was all completed. So that is something I am really proud and excited to have learned and use in the future. After dyeing, I then need to put on a sealant. So I take some leather sealant and coat the outside of my leather so that I do not get dye rubbing off onto my body. And also, it gives it a nice sheen that looks really, really nice once it's all dried up and ready to go. Next comes the most tedious part about leather work, edge finishing and stitching. Oh my goodness, there was a lot of edges on this project. When you are edge finishing, you are taking that kind of rough textured edge to the leather that you created when you are cutting the leather, and you are kind of sealing it with I believe it's a gum of some sort. It's called toconol. And you put the toconol onto the edge and rub it until it then holds down all of the textured portion of the edge pieces. This took hours. I took the toconol, my burnisher, and my leather with me wherever I went for a couple of days, and just burnished wherever I was. We went to the park, we were at home, I was in the car, but it did take quite a few hours in order to be able to finish this. And I was happy when I thought I was done, but lots and lots of work on that. Now, the last thing I need to do before I finally stitch everything together is install my hardware. If I do not put my snaps and my rivets and things, the belt loops onto my pouches before I sew them together, it's going to be a lot harder to sew them in and attach them later. Simply because I'm going to need to hammer them into place, and once it's all sewn up, you cannot access those areas to hammer it together as well. So my snaps, my belt loops, my rivets, they all go onto the leather before I stitch it up. So then I can add them all on and have it ready to go for final stitching. Now, I tried really hard to film all of my hardware adding and all of my stitch punching, but as you can tell, sometimes it might become a problem because I don't really have a good situation for putting my camera up, and every time I'm hammering on this table, it makes my camera fall over. So my camera has fallen over many times as I have been doing this whole process. So we can have a wonderful count on all of the times my camera has fallen over while I've been trying to film the leather punching on this project. The last part of this is obviously to stitch it all together, and I had quite a bit of stitching to do. It's not the biggest project I've ever done, but it was quite a lot. I did have to stitch the pouches together. I had to stitch all of the armor pieces onto the suit, which I will show later, as the suit at this point was not completed enough for me to be able to put the leather pieces onto. But we did get the pouches done, and everything is now ready to go for our final assembly on the suit. All right, so we have finished all of our leather work, and even though the actual power suit that I will be attaching this to is not done yet, so I cannot show you on the actual suit, I do have a couple of the finished pouches here. This is actually a thigh belt, so these will be on the thigh of the suit. We got some really good dye work on here, little tabs and snaps and things to hold it all together. I'm really happy with how these turned out, and I am super excited to put them onto the suit once that is completed.